Welcome to Autism Weekly, the podcast that discusses autism news, current events, and inclusion. Each week, we welcome a guest to the program to share their unique perspective and expertise as it relates to the fascinating world of autism. This week, we're excited to welcome
Rob Gorski to the podcast to talk with us about his experience as a full-time single dad to three awesome young men on the spectrum. He's also the author of the Autism Dad blog and the host of Autism Dad podcast, where he shares real-life stories that inspire other parents across the country. In some ways, Rob's family is like every other family, and in many other ways, they're very different. I love to get into these personal sides and to really explore what it is that makes having a unique family dynamic and how that feels on the parental end. So we're super excited to talk to you today, Rob, and thanks for joining the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
As we kind of work through this, Rob, I think that the best thing that we could possibly do is set the stage. Is that right now is that you are a dad and you have three very unique children. And I'd love to just get an understanding of, what makes your children unique. I mean, we all have children that have unique skills, unique lives, and yours is different than mine.
It's probably different. I think everybody's experience is different. And, my kids, they're all autistic in sort of different places. We are a blended family. That makes us a little bit different, I guess. And, my oldest is 22. I've raised him since he was a year old, and he was my first experience with autism, and he was diagnosed back in 2005. He has a very rare version of or form of autism called childhood disintegrative disorder, where he developed, typically he hit all of his milestones like he was supposed to, was doing great, no one thought anything was going on, and then around his 4th birthday, it was like we put him to sleep, he went to bed, one person, and woke up a completely different kid, to the point where like we grieved the loss of a child. And his whole demeanor changed, everything changed, and we had to kind of get to know him again. And that the Gavin that we knew for the first 4 years of his life, we've never seen that Gavin again. But you learn the new person who's there, and you embrace them and love them. And we've had our journey, and he's 22 and he's doing really well, and he's moving out sometime soon. And never thought we would get to this point, but he's surprised us and proved everybody wrong. So super proud of him.
Rob, if you don't mind, so you have an experience that I don't hear a lot of people talking about that often, and that is raising a child who had the diagnosis of childhood disintegrative disorder, because I don't even know if that's being diagnosed anymore. And that's something that probably families experience and they don't have a name for. They don't have the ability to be able to kind of, I guess, normalize what that might feel like from family to family. Do you talk to other families that have gone through that experience?
I've never met anybody else who's had a kid diagnosed with childhood disintegrative disorder. I've met, I just had Eileen Lamb on my podcast. She's a friend of mine, and her son, Charlie, regressed. He had a regressive form of autism as well. I don't know what that's labeled, and I don't know where that line is to differentiate just like regression versus childhood disintegrative disorder. I'm not sure where that kind of is. But one of the ways that part of the diagnostic process is parents, they describe the experience as putting their child to bed one person and waking up a completely different person. Like you don't recognize them. So you start getting these crazy things in your head. Like we've all seen those movies where like aliens come down and abduct our kids, or abduct someone and then like put like a clone or something in its place while they're doing whatever they're doing. It was, I mean, those ideas pop in your head because there's no other explanation for it. And it's so extreme that it's a really difficult thing. It's a really difficult thing to explain. It's a very difficult thing to go through. And it's very hard because your very human emotions they're driving you to grieve a child who's still there, which is a whole contradiction. in a lot of ways. But it is very, very difficult, and it's incredibly rare. I don't think it's even in the DSM anymore. And when his specialist at the Cleveland Clinic was telling us that they see maybe one kid every 5 years that'll come through with this diagnosis. And I don't know if the numbers stack up anymore, but it's incredibly, incredibly rare.
Yeah, and that's got to be something as a parent, and I think that you described it really well. It's tough because you might have expectations, but your expectation has to be ever changing, and you never know exactly where you're going to be, but you know that you love the child in front of you. So it's constant adaptability, and that stress is going to be really tough. This would be a very unique parenting relationship, but it sounds like your other two children probably are unique as well.
Yeah, Elliot and Emmett, they do really, really well. They are. I don't understand the way that they rate things. It used to be ASPE, which we don't use anymore, and then it's level 1, level 2, level 3. And I'm not really familiar with the way all of that works because I don't really care. I just see my kids as my kids. But they do really, really well. They're very social. They don't struggle a whole lot. There's a lot of anxiety. My youngest has a lot of sensory issues, but they presented very, very differently than Gavin did. So when Emmett was he's 14 now. He's my youngest. He was diagnosed as being nonverbal or whatever I don't think they diagnosed it, but they told us he was nonverbal and that he would probably never talk. And he didn't speak until he was about 4 years old. He failed all his hearing screenings, so we thought that he was unable to hear. And we went for the final testing for that, and they're like, "No, he hears just fine. He's just like ignoring you." And they said, "We think he's autistic." And so that took us down that road. Elliot, my middle son, is probably the least impacted, I guess. He's the one that you probably wouldn't notice the most, if that makes sense. And so I missed it, and I didn't see it because my only reference was his brothers on either side as to what autism is, and he was nothing like that. And it wasn't until he started preschool and I saw him interacting with his peers that it became obvious that there was something going on, and he was evaluated and went through the process, and he was diagnosed with autism as well. Him and Emmett were both diagnosed about the same time.
It really sounds as if you're basically explaining the spectrum. You have so many people out there that carry a similar diagnosis that have very different interests, very different skills, very different ways of engaging the world and perspectives. And it makes being a parent probably that much more challenging because you're trying to be able to empower each child and do it differently. And it's really just understanding how to do that within the dynamic of I have 3 children who might have different ways I need to be able to interact at different times. Is this something that, am I wrong to assume that this is an extremely stressful process?
You're not wrong to assume that. And what I used to tell people, like, I don't know. It's really hard for me to gauge my stress level anymore because it's the only thing I know, So I don't have a frame of reference where my life, before kids, maybe I have that reference, but I don't really have a reference as far as parenting goes that doesn't really involve all of these unique challenges. So this is sort of my normal. But I think for me, it was like I had to learn 3 different languages because they all needed to be spoken to and communicated with in different ways. And I struggled a lot with the sensory stuff because there is no one size fits all that will cover all 3 of my kids. They all had unique and sometimes conflicting needs, which is really frustrating because when you're trying to do something for one child that they need and what they need is upsetting to another child, then you end up with this situation where you can't win, and so you have to try and balance things out as best you can. And it was exhausting for a very long time, and it still sort of is, I guess. But my kids are much older, now, and they're 14, 16, and 22, and they do really well. My two youngest are being mainstreamed in high school for the first time, which is super awesome. And we have our challenges, but I just I don't know any better or know any different, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. No, it definitely makes sense. And I mean, just even for me raising my two daughters is that I often run into those conflicts all the time, as what's right for one might not be right for the other, and doing the dance all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But you always have to be there. It's a full-time job. And in the world, as far as the clinical or treatment world of autism, is that you have professionals that come in there and do some work and expect that the parent can follow through with everything, but it is exhausting. So how do you show up and be your best self for your children?
Well, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I am not my best self right now, and I feel like my kids are paying a price for that. You reach a point. There's this thought process that parents have, and it's all parents. I think it doesn't matter whether they have autistic kids or whatever. That your kids come first, no matter what, all the time. You put everything you have into your kids 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until they're 18 and move out or whatever. And the problem with that, at least in my case, and in a lot of families like mine, is that you wake up in the morning on your best day. On my best day, I'm not enough to meet the needs of my kids. And so you run into this situation where you're constantly putting into your kids over and over and over again, and you're depleting from the resources that you have to the point that you become sort of emotionally and physically bankrupt, and you burn out, and then you deal with depression and anxiety and that whole spiral down of mental health issues in yourself, which makes you unable to be the best version of yourself for your kids. And for me, I've learned the hard way quite a few times. I should have learned the first time, but you get lost. You get so lost in what you're doing, and you live from one challenge to the next that you forget. It's really easy to forget to take care of yourself, and that's something that I have really put a concerted effort into, especially since I became a single parent. I'm all my kids have, and I have to take care of myself in order to be there for them as long as I possibly can. And it's a delicate balance, and you feel guilty for taking time to yourself and all that stuff, but the alternative is unsustainable and set up for failure. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does, Rob. And I mean, what I don't want to push too far on this, but the
Whatever you want.
fact is that you're taking a lot on your own shoulders here.
Yes.
And at times I take a look at this overall picture, and I feel like, as a community, as a clinical partnership, as schools, as family and friends, especially as it comes to self-care and giving somebody maybe some slack at times and stepping in and being able to help support, asking the right questions so that you don't have to be the only one being transparent through a process, is that we're welcoming that discussion to be able to figure out how we can be better for you. And as that pertains, I'd love to hear your perspective on, what are the things that when you go out in the community with your three kids, you're trying to do everything that you can.
Mm-hmm.
What is it that we need to be doing different to be able to make that easier for families?
Oh, that's a good question. We're at a point now with my kids that, they do really, really well. And for the most part, with the exception of my oldest, most people probably, if you weren't spending a great deal amount of time with my kids, you probably wouldn't notice anything. The things that we struggled with forever were just basic accommodations. When you go somewhere and your kids are, I mean, there's that whole like kind of cliche example that everybody gives now with meltdowns and stuff at the grocery store. Your kids having a meltdown, everybody thinks that they're just a spoiled brat or you're terrible parents or whatever. It's those kinds of things are very common. Like it happens a lot. It's happened a lot to me as a parent. It's happened to a lot of people that I know. I've seen it myself, in other families. And I think if we can just be kind and understanding and not assume that we know what's going on in that moment, we can make things a lot easier for people. Because a lot of the issues, like I can deal with it myself. I just don't need anybody else jumping in or making snide comments or shooting dirty looks or whatever. Those things are the kind of things that kind of really beat you down over time. I can deal with the meltdowns when they were happening. I can deal with the outbursts, so I can deal with the behaviors. It's the lack of empathy, I think, that is more difficult to deal with. So be nice.
I'm so glad that you said that. I agree with that. I mean, that's the sentiment that I think that I guess if we lived our lives that way in general, we'd all be happier people. I agree. I know I totally agree with your sentiment. Just because even for your sons, that it takes a discerning eye to recognize that there might be any sort of difference in their social awareness or perspective or anything like that, where it's just that they fit in, they blend in, they have their unique characteristics, but maybe some of the autism characteristics show up from time to time. I saw that even this weekend when I was out, and we were doing some zip lining, but I was watching as far as the other families that were involved, where the child had made a comment. It was slightly off. It didn't fit the environment at that time. And people started treating that person differently just because of that one comment. That rush to judgment seemed to be a big issue. And I couldn't imagine trying to go through life day after day where I'm constantly concerned of what is this person going to say, or what is the remark going to be, or do I have to protect myself? Is that the shield that you sometimes have to wear?
Not so much anymore. With my oldest, when he was a little bit younger, he still really doesn't have much of he doesn't have a filter, right? So, and he uses a lot of words that he doesn't really understand. So we even have issues in the home, with his brothers, where he'll say something. I know what he means because I've been interpreting for him since he was a kid. I know what he means. I know he doesn't mean anything by it, and he's just sort of misspoken or chose the wrong words. But it comes across in a way to the people who are hearing it, or it's directed at, that it can be very offensive or very upsetting. And with my kids, with most people, if you explain to the average person, oh, I'm sorry, they didn't mean it like that, this is what they meant, this is kind of what's going on, whatever, like, oh, okay, I get it, no problem. With my kids, they can kind of be triggered by that. And so even though I explained to them that that's not what he meant, guys, like, come on, like, we've had this conversation like a million times. He's going to say that because he saw it in a movie. He has no idea what it means. He's not directing it at you in a negative way. Just is what it is. We work on it, trying to keep him to, not say things if he doesn't have to, whenever. But even they struggle with that. They can't let that go. And it's a struggle. I mean, it's a struggle anywhere you go, really. If you have a child who just blurts out things that are not appropriate or behaves in a way that's not appropriate in public, there's a lot of judgment. There's a lot of assumptions made. And people are, I've noticed this over the last 20 years, people are more apt to criticize, critique, or judge than they are to step in and offer help, comfort, and support. And that's kind of a sad state that we live in, if that's the way things are. And it's not that hard to do better. Just keep your mouth closed. You have nothing else to say, don't say it. Just walk past the people who are having an issue with the child with a meltdown or something. You don't have to say something. You don't have to share your opinion. You don't have to say, a kid needs to be disciplined or whatever. Just walk past them. It's so much easier just to not say something than it is to say something cruel and hurtful. And majority of the time, I think people are misunderstanding or misreading the situations, or it's more that the communication is so vastly different that there's just they're not connecting, I guess.
No, it absolutely does. And I think that comes to play a lot nowadays with the idea of the balance between treatment and acceptance, between celebrating neurodiversity and empowering different skill sets that might not be there. Right now, one of the big discussions out there is that idea of treatment and acceptance. And we talk a lot about, and just now we talked about, the society needs to start understanding these things might happen. They have a different intent. They have a different purpose.
Yeah.
So, but there is the treatment part of, how do we empower somebody? How do I give them some of the social skills, some of the cueing so that they can benefit through it? And there's got to be a balance between that. And I was just interested in kind of
that's a good question.
Your children's path.
Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down now. All right. So a couple of things. One, I am not of the mindset, if we lived in this utopian society where we could just say, I want the world to adapt to meet the needs of my kids, and kids like them and adults like them, whatever, that'd be fantastic, right? It's never going to happen, though. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so I have worked with my kids to help prepare them for the world while I'm advocating for them to the world to make the world ready for them. And it's just, it's not going to be perfect. They're going to make mistakes. They're going to say things that make them stick out or whatever. And it's okay. Because like we embrace the weird in my house, and my kids are weird. I'm weird. Like we're just, it's okay to be weird. Weird isn't a bad thing. And I think as time goes on and more people are sharing their stories and more people are talking openly about these things, and you have a lot of self-advocates who are sharing their firsthand experience, people become more aware. And I think the younger generations are more, they're more understanding and compassionate sort of by default. That's kind of like their default setting. And they're more tolerant and accepting than people who have, been around a little while and kind of see, you have ADHD, you're just making excuses for not remembering, or you're lazy, you're not motivated, whatever. There's a difference in the way that we view things when it comes to stuff like that. And I don't know that we're ever going to change the viewpoint of some people, but I think raise our kids to be kind and compassionate, and let them know that being different isn't a bad thing. You can be who you are regardless of who that is, and it's okay. And as they grow up, they're empowered to stand up for people who might be bullied because they're different, or like my kids, for the most part, they don't care what other people think. They're themselves. They're unapologetically themselves, and they express themselves with clothes that they wear, or the music that they listen to, or whatever. And it's healthy and it's appropriate, and it makes them feel more confident, I guess. And I don't think there's like a one size fits all approach that's going to work. I think it's just because every autistic person is so different, and every family is so different, that if again, it goes back to, if we just treat people with kindness by default, like if we're just nice to people, then a lot of these things will sort of resolve themselves. And it's really hard because autism is such a dynamic condition, and it's so different for so many people. It's hard to sort of prep the world for what autism means. And I can go off on that for a minute, because I have I've been wanting to do a show on this, because I think a lot of the issue that we run into is there are so many versions of people. There's so many different symptoms and conditions and experiences that all fall under the same term as autism. And I think that leads to a lot of confusion and misunderstanding, and a lot of conflict and unnecessary, problems.
No, but it's a tangent that I think probably should be explored more, and whether you have a show on that, you actually, I think that it's something I'd love to tackle as well, because it's a really important question for us to be able to understand. And then with the diagnosis is, I mean, are you really treating the diagnosis, or what you're trying to do is empower the person to be able to improve in whatever ways they want to improve in?
Happy,
And
healthy,
it's looking at
living their
that whole
best life.
process.
Yeah, I want my kids, I don't define. I think we have to redefine what we feel. We have to redefine what success is to us. I got into an argument, and I never engage with people, trolls, or people who upset me online or whatever. Well, that's not true. I do sometimes. Sometimes they get under my skin. Not as much anymore. But when a couple years ago, I got into it with this dad who was. We were talking about success, and he expressed that his autistic son will never be successful in his eyes because he's never going to have a management position. He's never going to have his own apartment. He's not going to have people working underneath him. He's not going to have a fast car. He's not going to be married and give him grandkids. I mean, I don't know how he knows that at that age, uh, but I was like, man, that's really sad because you're you're setting him up for failure. He's never going to meet what your expectation of success is, and he's never gonna level up to you. And I think it's so important that we have reasonable expectations for our kids. And our ultimate goal as parents should be that we want our kids to be happy and healthy. We want them to be able to be productive members of society in whatever capacity that is, and we want them to live a life that they're happy with. You know, safe, happy, healthy, and loved. I mean, those are the key things. I don't care what kind of job they have. I don't care if they get married or they don't get married, if they choose to do that or not do that or whatever the deal is. I just want them to be happy. And to me, if I have raised my kids through all of this stuff that we've been through and we survived this pandemic and whatever the next one is, and they're happy and healthy and as independent as they can be, living their best life, that's success for me. In my eyes, I think that
Absolutely.
because it's all relative. We can't lump everybody into a specific thing. It's relative. I just had this conversation with my friend Kate
Yeah.
Swenson about success in our kids. It's a good topic.
No, I think it's one that probably all parents should step back and have that conversation, autistic or not. I mean, it's a matter of we should all be having that same perspective, because if you're going to raise a healthy child, you have to be supportive of them, and you have to cheer on their goals, their ambitions, what makes them happy, so that they can
Yeah.
continue to fulfill it. One of the things that I'd love to kind of understand is your path to becoming an advocate. Is that,
Sure.
to be honest, your transparency, it is a breath of fresh air. You're open, you're honest, you're willing to share. Not everybody's there, but how
No.
did you get into becoming an advocate? And how could we
Accidentally.
encourage more of this dialogue?
Well, it was an accident, to be completely honest. I didn't set out to fulfill this role. I was really frustrated and overwhelmed with when my oldest was first diagnosed. I was overwhelmed, right, and I wasn't coping very well, and I was just struggling with everything. And because I'm a fixer, right, and I was a fire medic for a long time, and like I see a problem and I want to help him, but there's nothing that I can do to help him because what he had, you can't take that away, and I can't, I can't fix the medical conditions. I can't. So you feel powerless and hopeless. And excuse me, my wife at the time, Gavin's mom, was like, you should write in a journal because I think that that's healthy to do that. And I was like, I'm all tech stuff. I can't sit there and write on paper. So she's like, you should start a blog. Nobody's ever going to read it. It's make it private, whatever. And so I set up this WordPress blog called Lost and Tired because that's how I felt. And I started just kind of word vomiting everything that I was feeling and dealing with, not thinking anybody was ever going to read it because it was not. I don't feel like it was fit for human consumption outside of me. And it turned out it wasn't private, and it was. I don't know how people started to find it, but they started to find it, and then it started getting shared, and there were things that were going viral, and it became this. What I thought was expressing all this negative energy, in a constructive way for myself, and then walking away from it. I thought that's what I was doing. But what I was really doing inadvertently was uh, showing people that they're not alone, and that they are not the only person who is feeling those things, and that it's okay to feel those things because it doesn't matter what you feel; it's how you deal with it that makes a difference. And just because my kids, I mean, all three of my kids are autistic. They drive me nuts. They drive me crazy. And it's okay to say that, right? Because kids are supposed to drive their parents crazy. I drove my parents crazy, and I'm sure my parents drove my grandparents crazy. It's just the way that it is. And talking openly about it and sharing the good, the bad, the ugly, and the victories and the setbacks. And I'm fond of sharing my own mistakes, which have been many. And because I feel like there wasn't anybody doing that when I started out, and so I had to learn everything the hard way. And if I can help people, if I can help people avoid some of the pitfalls or the mistakes that I made by kind of lighting that path, it works. It helps me because I feel like I'm contributing something outside of. I'm making something positive is coming from all of the struggle, and it kind of fills that need for me to help people and connect with people. And my kids have loved it. It's as they get older, it's a little bit harder to kind of share as openly, but you know, they've all taken part in helping to educate parents and helping kids feel like they're not alone, and sharing what like sensory things are like for them, and how they deal with anxiety and tips and tricks and all that kind of stuff, because they like feeling like they're helping people. And I think it's a good thing. And I don't think uh, there's anything to be ashamed of. I think, these are all things that millions of people are dealing with, and not enough people are talking about it. So it kind of feels like it's taboo, or like you're sort of stepping outside of the norm. But really, I'm just talking about what I'm experiencing as a parent raising three kids who happen to be autistic. And autism plays a big role in some of the challenges and joys and setbacks and all that kind of stuff. But we're just a family, and it's evolved over the years to my when their mom left, and it became just sort of the story of myself and the boys. Um, I changed it to the autism dad because I was trying to find something that was more positive, that was more focused on me and less on my kids, because they were getting older, and I was concerned more about privacy stuff for them. And for myself, I mean, I'm an open book. I'll tell you whatever you want. Um, and then it evolved from that into the podcast, which is doing really well. And it's all about just being transparent and um, sharing things that I'm feeling and going through, because there's somebody out there who's going to benefit from it. And I've been very lucky to be able to do this, because I am a full-time, or I was for a long time, full-time caregiver to three kids, and each one of them were full-time jobs. And I've been able to build a business around this where I can, help more people. I can take care of my family. I can do what I'm passionate about, and get to talk to people like you.
Well, I, for one, thank you for doing this, Rob. I think that allowing somebody to have that peek over the fence and to be able to kind of see what's going on and to understand and almost encourage them to take off their own mask at times
Mhm.
and be themselves. I think that's super important. Where can people that are listening, access the blog, access the podcast? Because it's
Sure.
important for everybody to have this open dialogue.
I've tried to make it as easy as I possibly can. So if you just go to theautismdad.com, everything can link from there. The podcast can be found on any of the podcasting apps that you listen to. You just look up the Autism Dad podcast. But there's a dedicated site for that, and there's if you just visit theautismdad.com, there's links in the menu bar at the top where it'll take you everywhere you want to go.
And I don't want to leave this episode with me sharing any of my experience on this, because this is your chance to be able to talk to our audience. And the fact that you've been so transparent and that you've lived in the way that you have, just to be able to kind of say, this is my unique, this is my true self, and you're going to hear it, and hopefully you learn from it. I want to hear your parting words to our guests about, and to the parents that are out there listening, as if you had that chance right now to say just a few words to them, what would it be?
I think what I needed to hear when I was starting out was that it was going to be okay. You know, um, you hear, your child has a diagnosis, and when you have a child on the way, you start, planning the future out before they're even there, right? And when your child is diagnosed as autistic, a lot of times those plans have to be remade, right? They have to be adapted or changed or whatever, and that's okay. It doesn't mean it's not the end of the world. Autism is not a death sentence. It's just a different way of existing, and there could be a lot of challenges, but there's also a lot of joy and things that you will be able to experience that you would never been able to experience otherwise. I want people to take care of themselves. That's huge. Self-care is huge, and you got to start out right away, because once you burn out, you can get behind the 8 ball on a lot of things, and it's hard to recover from. And like you said, you want to show up for your kids, and you want to be the best version of yourself for your kids because that's what they deserve. In order to do that, you have to put back into yourself. And my therapy is another good one, guys. So therapy. My therapist told me that you have to be selfish before you can be selfless. And I like that better than the whole put the oxygen mask on first analogy, because so many people feel like self-care is selfish, and it is, but there's different types of that. And taking care of yourself so that you can ultimately be a better person for your kids is the right kind of selfish, and you got to do it. Your kids deserve the best version of you. You deserve to be the best version of you. And if you can just take a breath, know that everything is going to be okay. You're going to figure it out. Take care of yourself, build up your support group, and just take it a day at a time, hour at a time, minute by minute if you have to sometimes. And, don't be afraid to reach out. I'm known to get on Zoom calls with parents when they're struggling, just to listen, and be a sounding board so that they know they're not the only person that's been through that. But reach out to people. I mean, if I can help, I'm very accessible, probably too accessible, but I like to help, and I don't want people to go through anything like I had to go through, when you lived in this vacuum of information. So,
no, I think everything that you said there is something that we should all internalize, and I appreciate the fact that you were able to put it in such an articulate way that's showing the emotion behind it. And I do appreciate your sharing of all your stories and your expertise of, this is my experience. This is what I've learned. This is what I found important with us today on the podcast, and for being there. And hopefully we can do it again.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.